Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So, can you hear me? Pretty well, good. Well, it's wonderful to see you all this morning. Both, all of you on Zoom and everyone here in 3 dimensions with each other. And if you could see behind my mask, you'd see I was smiling. I'm happy to see you. And it's a good thing I had this talk together. I might not have gotten out of bed so early this morning. For the snow. We have snow here for those of you who are, I know at least one of you in Zoom land is in California. So, so this morning I'm basing my talk on this case, a very short case from the Blue Cliff record, case number 14. And in it, Yun Men is an astute Zen master, and one of his monks comes to him and says, asks the question. He says, what's the goal of a lifetime of practice? And Yun Men's answer is an appropriate response. So it's a very simple yet a profound answer. A lifetime of practice and study is behind it. You may also have been referencing the lifetime of teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha. So this monk's question is one of the nature of our practice. So life happens to us moment by moment. It's up to us to respond appropriately. But what does that mean in different situations? On the most basic level, it means we wake up in the morning and we brush our teeth. Or we eat our lunch and we do our dishes. That's an appropriate response at the simplest of levels. So can we just do that? Just do those, just make those appropriate responses without argument or resistance? Just setting those aside and simply acting. My first teacher, Kadagiri Roshi, used to tell us, just get up and brush your teeth and move your cushion, that's it. That was easy for him. The rest of us had to drive to the center. But it was I'll never forget that teaching, you know, just get up, brush your teeth, and then sit down. Without letting all the, well, maybe I shouldn't, maybe this, maybe that, start to come in. So on a more complex level, we're having a difficult conversation with someone. When they say something that triggers something in us that's negative, how do we respond? How can we respond with kindness and compassion in all situations, involving other people, even when we are feeling anger or strong emotion? That's a good question. Because Dharma asks this of us and defines an appropriate response to other beings as wisdom, kindness, and compassion. You may feel that it's too much to be able to respond appropriately to someone who's displaying even a mild form of aggression. And I agree that it can feel really hard. So we might try to just avoid that conversation, right? Or that person. But we can't always do that. How do we avoid our fellow Sangha members? How do we avoid our partners or our children or our parents? We can't. We can't avoid it. Even if we surround ourselves with really enlightened folks like all of you, who are very pleasant to be around, still conflict arises. And the more intimate we get with each other, the more the chances are that eventually a conflict will arise. And I certainly see that more at Hokyoji, where we're a smaller group. it's easier to experience that with a smaller group of folks. But it's also a very committed group of people, so everyone's committed to face-to-face, intimate conversation. So I've made the practice of kind speech and deep listening central to my life for many years now. Early in my practice, especially after I was ordained as a novice priest here, I felt my lack in that area. I saw that I needed to work on that. So I just began to do it. And so Dogen's kind speech, right speech from the Eightfold Path, counsel process, and also nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg's work that he did, which has been probably the most helpful to me. He discovers that if we can identify our feelings and our needs, and if we can express those to the other person, that's very helpful. If we can also identify the way we evaluate and judge other people. And you may not think you do that, but actually, just sit down, come to a retreat, sit down, and watch that unfold, watch that come up. And that can be hard for people at the beginning of practice when they sit down and realize, oh my God, I'm really a judgmental person. At least that was hard for me. And it just took a lot of practice to see that and see that and see that and see that, and then let go of that. And it still comes up, as it will. So, yeah, it takes overcoming, especially with nonviolent or compassionate communication. You have to overcome the first awkwardness of learning to speak in a different way, a way that is not the way we learn in our culture, and our very language sort of is very binary. It splits things apart. And Marshall Rosenberg even went so far as to call it violent. So it also takes a willingness to stay in relationship with another person. So we don't walk away and we don't turn our back on anybody. And that's really difficult to do. You know, maybe you've done that and you've seen the response in your life to walking away. It's not a very good practice. Sometimes we have to do it. If we're really backed into a corner, or someone is very abusive, we have to turn our back. But in general, that's not a great tactic for communicating with other people, just avoidance or casting them out of our lives. So we have to be willing when approaching this work to stay in a relationship with that person. That's key. So compassion arises from emptiness. This is an important point. The Heart Sutra, which in its abbreviated form is chanted at all Zen centers, including ours. It sounds like it's simply negating all the early teachings of the Buddha. But it's actually just negating them in order to free us from fixed views and concepts. It's also celebrating wisdom beyond wisdom, that very end part. Bodhisvaha, that's like, will be, you know, this was the great mantra, the supreme mantra, and yay, whoopee. So we learn that compassion arises out of that teaching. So at first we think, what is this? no eyes, no ears, no nose, no body, no mind. This sounds weird. It sounds really weird. But as we do it, we chant it, and we get it in our body, and we pair it with our sitting practice, we see that, yeah, compassionate response does arise out of this, out of emptiness. This teaching that leaps beyond all teaching and all concepts. Well, let's take a deeper look at compassion. And I'm going to reference here some of the teachings of two of my favorite teachers, which is Christina Feldman and Pam Children. So Christina gives us this, that there are two aspects of compassion. There's two Pali words for it, anukampa and karuna. Karuna, many of you are probably familiar with, but I wasn't familiar with this, with anukampa. So anukampa means to tremble with. It's the empathic dimension of compassion when we feel ourselves trembling for that other person that we're being compassionate with. It resonates with and is touched by the pain of another. That's anukampa. Karuna captures the dimension of compassion that involves meeting a situation and then acting in a compassionate way. So there's a dynamic relationship between those two aspects of compassion, and our engagement in the world needs to be attuned to the situation, which requires us to be present, be open, and listen deeply. Like Avalokiteshvara, hearing the cries of the world. So what if our practice is all about developing the capacity to respond more appropriately to all the dimensions of human experience? We celebrate birth and growth, and we feel much joy around it. And today I get to celebrate the second birthday of my family. Yay! We enter deeply into the profound experience of death and learn what it has to teach us, and everything in between these two bookends. And these two words, anukampa and karuna, with their different meanings, point to the way we can attune ourselves to respond more compassionately through deep listening and presence, embodied presence. So I want to tell a story about chaplaincy training. When I first entered into this year of residency, I really felt anxious to learn some skills. I wanted to have tools in my tool belt. And I was scared of the idea of walking into a room and where someone is, suffering a health crisis and not knowing what to do, with the emphasis on doing. I think you could probably relate to that. And I think I got a third of the way through that year before I realized that most often my presence and deep listening were probably the most used skills, the most helpful too. And I think my supervisor at the time really appreciated Buddhist chaplains. There were others that came after me. They had at one time 3 people on staff that were Buddhist. Because we didn't come with, for number one, the zeal to proselytize. we already came with, missing that piece, which they were happy about. So I tried to meet those situations, and the way we learned was to be thrown into the situation, basically. There was nothing academic about it, really. There was very little academic. Just like our lives aren't academic, are they? They're about the immediacy of now and now and now. So what we had to do is go in and visit with the person, and then we would leave and write up the whole experience. It was called verbatim. So we were supposed to word for word write up what happened between us and our patient, and then bring it back to the group and share it with the group and get feedback, which was pretty scary at first, to get feedback. But, we got used to it. So that's what our life is like. We're thrown into situations and we try to respond appropriately, and then we reflect on them. And Zazen totally helps that. I wanted to take my practice out off the cushion and into the world at that time. So I found out that this training was like a year-long session, but it was not a session of silence. There was a lot of talking, and processing, but it still felt like it had the intensity of a session, and I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. So Christine offers this practice to help us attune ourselves, to make us prone to the appropriate response, and it's called Just Like Me. So in situations of stress, we practice seeing the common humanity and shared vulnerability that we all have. When we see someone behaving in a way that we consider unskillful or wrong, we practice the recognition, oh, just like me. That's a recognition of the vulnerability we all share to foolishness, reactivity, anger, and delusion. So it's not about how we feel or what we accomplish, what we get done in this practice. It's about the intentions we commit to and embody in our lives. So sometimes we call intention vow, as in the 4 Bodhisattva vows that we chant here on Sundays. And sometimes we just say, I'm setting an intention. So it's really important practice to do that. And that's really helpful. It's been helpful to me. Sometimes I do it daily. Just when I wake up, I set an intention for what I'm working on. So today I'm going to be really mindful in all the things I do. Or today I'm going to be aware and mindful of my feelings. All day long, I'm going to monitor that. There's a lot of ways that we can work with intention. So compassion is a practice of seeing beyond the automatic reactivity of our conditioning and a striving to achieve the goal, these impossible vows of the Bodhisattva. These vows necessitate the development of compassion. Even though we know we can't possibly do it, we still make that vow. So according to Pema, really being present for another, a child, a parent, a spouse, a client, whatever, means not shutting down on that person, which means, first of all, not shutting down on ourselves. This means allowing ourselves to feel what we feel and not pushing it away. It means accepting every aspect of ourselves, even the parts we don't like. And that's pretty daunting, isn't it? That's pretty daunting, but it's possible. So doing this requires patience and openness, basically not fixating or holding on to anything. At the beginning of our practice, this might be unexpected and may feel really daunting. We're getting to know ourselves at a deeper level. We might find that we are evaluating and judging others constantly. Having a teacher or a mentor to talk to at this point is really helpful. Really helpful. So practicing this over and over on the cushion and in our lives develops those two key qualities of wisdom and compassion. Insight into our patterns and the willingness to allow them to change becomes wisdom. Attending to our feelings and needs and to others becomes karuna, compassionate action. So to study and practice the paramitas and the immeasurables, kind speech, deep listening, plus our sitting practice of letting go inclines us to the ongoing possibility of the appropriate response that Yunnan is talking about here. Our tradition gives us lots of opportunities. And we do need to set our intention or vow often. Delusion is inexhaustible, particularly self-delusion, and that's where intention and vow come in. We have to remind us to pay attention to what it is that we want to experience, what we want to have happen. So it's often difficult, moment by moment, to find an appropriate response to this world, what's happening in this world. Just in the past year and a half, the focus on racial injustice, the pandemic, and also the warming climate. We might have just a simmering level of anxiety about those things that's in the background. So instead of ignoring them, we can let them in. And if we get overwhelmed, well, then we can be an overwhelmed bodhisattva, at least for a period of time. Can we see ourselves as a bodhisattva who's overwhelmed? So in the moment of being overwhelmed, that's our practice. Just being there with that. I think if we can see ourselves as overwhelmed bodhisattvas, we might not stay in that place so long. We might be able to join up with other bodhisattvas and come up with a response, some kind of appropriate response to the situation that's so distressing for us. So practices and intentions will be there when we're not lost and overwhelmed anymore. And our path in training to be fully ourselves and allowing others to be fully themselves. That's pretty cool. From that fullness of being ourselves and letting others be themselves, an appropriate response can emerge. When we're fully ourselves, we see that our lives are fragile and that we can be tender with our fragile lives. Our acceptance of this can lead the way to an appropriate response. When we meet things this way, we can respond to things just as they are, and we're generous with our lives. We're also patient, mindful, gentle, and open. Even at the very beginning of our practice, when we open things to things as they are, as they appear, we are open to myriad possibilities. So I wonder if you'd be willing to do a guided meditation with me on compassion for yourself, which is where we have to start, always with ourselves. So settling down, closing the eyes, if that's comfortable for you, or casting them down. Be mindful of your body, mind, and emotions of this time. Sense what is well in you. Places in your body that are at ease, the sounds that are registering, the movement of the breath. Welcome and appreciate all that is well. Now sense what may be difficult or painful in this moment. Areas of your body that feel distressed. Listening into the difficult thoughts or feelings that may be present. Maybe sadness, maybe anxiety, or just simple restlessness, encircling thoughts. Notice how they register in the body. Explore what it's like to touch the painful or difficult with compassion. Sense what it is to allow your heart to tremble but not be broken in the face of your own difficult thoughts and feelings. Knowing pain as pain, sadness as sadness. Explore what it is to plant the seeds of compassion in the center of pain or difficulty. May I find healing. May I find peace in this moment. May I rest in care and compassion. The words aren't important, they're just a way of remembering the possibility of embracing life as it is and touching our bodies and minds with compassion. And next we widen the circle to include all whom we know and love. May you find healing. May you find peace in this moment. May you rest in care and compassion. We don't need to know the story of the other person to know that, like us, each person longs for peace and the end of suffering. We can now extend this out to all the people we don't know. May you find healing. May you find peace in this moment. May you rest in care and compassion. We explore the ways we can bring compassionate awareness to the many ways we interact with the world. We see suffering and learn to not turn away. We do all that we can to help and heal. We learn that we can tremble in empathy at another's pain and yet still be courageous. Compassion brings dignity to our lives and enables us to be a conscious participant in healing the world. May I find healing. May I find peace in this moment. May I rest in care and compassion. Now, coming back. Thank you for participating in that guided meditation. And I'd like to just end today with this, with reading an excerpt from Tenshin Red Anderson's book on our gifts. And it starts with a poem by Dogen's Chinese teacher, Cheng Tong Ruji, called The Wind Bell. The whole body is a mouth hanging in emptiness, not caring which way the wind blows, east, west, north, or south. All day long it sings Prajna Paramita for all beings. Ting tong, ting tong. And this is what Red has to say about this. The wind bell is unconcerned with which direction the wind blows or how gently or strongly it's blowing. Like a Buddha, it responds appropriately to the conditions at hand. In the process of responding without picking and choosing, its chimes may touch each other and make sound. Or the chimes may not touch and therefore won't make sound. The wind bell has no preferences. It is beyond thinking. It has no fixed position, and because of that, it always responds appropriately to the given situation. It's like a spontaneously acting Zen master, responding appropriately and always singing the songs of the wisdom of the gentle Buddhas. So that's what I have to share today about an appropriate response. So I'm wondering if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make now, including all of you in Zoom land.
Yeah, so the wind bell is all beings throughout space and time. And some of the beings are up to no good. So how would you conceive of the relationship to the appropriate response to an inappropriate action? Because they're all the beings are, you don't have a wind bell unless you have all beings.
Right. Well, I think that, this practice that Christina came up with is helpful to me, because I don't personally think it's helpful to confront someone who's behaving badly, unless it's your role in life, if it's somebody at work and you're their supervisor and you're supposed to give them feedback, then give them feedback, as kindly as possible. But in general, I try to just, when I see something, a bad actor, as you say, I try to just remember that I have that within me. So I protect my own mind and heart. That's the main point.
I'm thinking more in a more metaphysical way. Like, how does this wind bell is Susan Nelson, that clearly is all of the beings as well? How does this wind bell approach the malefactor? Because at some point the promise is, the assertion is, the position is that there is, that the wind bell bell is not involved in malefaction.
Right.
And yet, the paradox is that it includes all malefactors.
It's true, that paradox is there, but the wind bell doesn't pick and choose. The wind bell rings or doesn't ring, but it's empty of picking and choosing and discrimination. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Well, it's just this interesting thing where you have the malefactor as paradoxically doing, by definition, she or he can't do an inappropriate response. In some sense, if you're really thinking about that, there is no inappropriate response. The wind bell is just gently ringing. Something to think about. It's a bit of a puzzle.
Yeah, I think it is. I wouldn't think to put that together with the action of the wind bell. The mouth, what you call it?
Well, just a bad action. A bad action is a bad action.
Right.
There's no way the wind bell can't somehow include that in its metal. And so it's just, to me, that's an interesting question.
Well, thanks for bringing that forward. Pat?
Well, the wind bell may move in a direction it may not want to. Doesn't that throwing off its string and may go wherever it may go, but the wind bell just go wherever it'll go. So that's how it responds.
Thank you, thanks, Pat. Charlie?
No, I just on a simple level, appreciate what we have. It seems like a hard thing to do until you wake up one morning and you have an ache in your side or something is bothering you, and you say, oh, man, I was feeling so good the last few days and I didn't even appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, mindfulness of well-being is important. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh says too, he says, you may have to go to the dentist, but when you don't have any problems with your teeth, you overlook that. We overlook when things are going well, or we take it for granted, thinking that that's the way it should always be. John?
I was thinking to combine what everyone has said here, including Charlie, who said, we're lucky to be alive to hear the wind, regardless of what it may be chiming. I mean, we just have to appreciate the fact that we're here and have the ability to be aware and to hear it. So it kind of combines what everyone said.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Anybody at home?
Susan,
Yes.
it's Carrie. I'd raised my hand, but I don't know if you can see that there. Thank you so much for this talk. It is a little difficult. There's a little bit of an echo, just so you know, because you're speaking in the room, so I'm not getting everything. I wanted to ask you, because I didn't get about the training that you were in for a year. With what kind of training was that with the patients?
Right, it was chaplaincy training in healthcare environments, hospitals and hospice.
That's what I kind of got, but I wanted to clarify that because I think this is, you're bringing up something, that vow and that intention that is the container for our moment to moment actions. And that's what really resonated with me, that the coming back to what is our intention, what is our vow, and then from there, how do we respond from that place of vow and intention, and find the appropriate response. And like you spoke of, and which really spoke to me, when responding to people who are close to us, family members, partners, even coworkers, people that we deal with every day, how it becomes more difficult, and to remind ourselves of that vow and intention, which may be sometimes taking a moment to not speak or take a breath before we can respond. Like you said, with nonviolent communication is so important, but to not try to, because I do find this hard sometimes, to walk away or turn our backs. But if we can say, I need to come back to this, right? I can't respond to it right now how I would like to, with my vow and intention, but I will return to this at another time. That's sometimes the best we can do. So thank you so much for this talk. It was very helpful to me.
Thank you, Carrie, and thanks for bringing up that point about the necessity sometimes of stepping back and taking a break and calming down and reminding ourselves of what our vow is, what our intention is. Yeah. And also that point about how sometimes it really is the people that are closest to us where we have the most trouble with communication, because we're around each other so much and the patterns play out. So yeah, thank you.
Susan, I just coming back along the same lines as Carrie, just how that is in the Paramitas, the idea of forbearance, Kashanti, and sometimes and even with what Steve was saying, to be able to sit with something that's really difficult. I remember the end stages of my job, how difficult it was, and how things were. The immediate reaction was to shut down and be angry. So to stick with it and not respond, but to see what's arising for myself. It was so much a part of that at that time. And right now, the kind of times we're living in, that's so important, to realize you're not going to get it all. And, your responses might be complex, and you've got to sit with all of those responses and see where compassion arises for you. So thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I almost gave the talk titled Patience as a Factor of Enlightenment. Even though it's not, strictly speaking, one of the 7 factors of enlightenment, I think it really should be. Hi, Emily.
Yeah, again, thank you for the talk. This might seem obvious, I'm trying to speak up. But I think when, as Carrie said, when you take that step back and give yourself that break, that's practicing self-compassion.
Mm-hmm. It is.
That's all I have to say. It's important to think of, having that compassion for ourselves as well as those around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi.
Mayor, do you ever think there's a time when the appropriate response would be almost like a tough love type compassion, where there would be a situation where somebody is doing something harmful to themselves or something like that, where it's not always a passive, but the right response would be an active, very almost pseudo-confrontational to do something that would probably be in somebody's best interest, despite the fact that they don't necessarily know that yet. How would you reconcile that with not overbearing on somebody and giving people space to make their own decisions?
Right, that's a good point. I think, depends on how you interpret tough love, you know, and how you would carry that out. But it's case by case in every situation, and I think as long as the love's there, you know, so it's not just tough. You know, I think that can be very appropriate. You know, when you raise children, you have to be tough with them sometimes. You have to set limits. And sometimes you have to get in their face, you know, if they're really, really acting out in a way that's dangerous for them or someone else, you know. But that's the key, is to how do you do that? How do you interpret it? And there doesn't have to be any right answer, but it's something to really contemplate when contemplating responding in that way, you know. Somebody was saying, I was listening to a talk by Melissa Blacker, and she was talking about how a friend of hers who's a teacher, a Zen teacher, had a student come and say, you just don't care about me, you know, and I don't, you know, think this relationship is doing me any good. The way her friend responded was, I care very deeply for your enlightenment, for your awakening. And I thought that was a good response. Well, okay, I think that we are done now with questions and answers. I'll turn it over to our wonderful host for the morning.
Before I make the announcements, I'll pass around our dot or gift bowl. And your guests, of course, help keep the Zendo and Saga a safe, warm refuge in the winter that I have.